Hello and welcome to the Royal Record here on GB News. Every week we'll be bringing you exclusive access and insights behind palace walls. I'm Cameron Walker, GB News' Royal Correspondent.
And I'm Svar Nanan-Sen, Royal Editor of gbnews.com. You can get in touch and let us know your thoughts on anything we discussed this week using the hashtag GBN Royal Record or emailing us at royal@gbnews.uk.
Yeah, brand new hashtag, brand new email address, so do get in touch. And this week we've got an incredibly special guest. Earlier this month, before I introduce him, the Queen hosted a reception at Buckingham Palace marking 90 years of the equine charity Brooke. The patron of that charity, GB News star Alastair Stewart. Welcome to the first ever episode of the Royal Record.
Well, I'm deeply honoured. I mean, it's a new era, and lovely to see you again. Yes. I normally see you in a different context, but great to talk to you. And it was a fabulous event, and delighted that that both my wife Sally and I were able to attend.
Absolutely, and I think many people see it as an incredible honour to be invited to Buckingham Palace. But for those viewers and listeners who perhaps have never been to the palace, just talk us through the process of what's it like, A, getting the invitation, and then B, turning up at the palace gates? What happens?
Well, on the invitation, first of all, I'll say something because the palace and the charity Brooke were so kind. I explained, as GB News viewers and listeners know, that I have dementia now, and therefore I don't drive, and also I need to be guided through important big events. And so I said to the charity, although the invitation was to me, would it be possible, please, to extend it to my lovely wife Sally, who in effect is also my carer? And the charity and the palace both said yes, of course, delighted to do that. And so we duly turned up at if you stood on the Victoria Monument,
yes.
The gate on the right was the one that we were told to use, and so Sally drove up to it, and the police all immediately leapt out, and we had a sticker in the window that meant we were entitled to go in, which I'd never, ever done before, although I've been to the palace a few times.
Yes.
And they checked the car, they checked the boot, the normal security things, and they did it absolutely charmingly. Although they said, can we check the boot? And Sally said, yes, do be careful, but it's full of donkey feed and dog food and stuff like that. And they laughed, and they were lovely. And we went then through the narrow little way into the beautiful courtyard, which again, viewers will be familiar with, because it's by that beautiful glass canopy where the open carriages draw up for things like state opening of Parliament, royal weddings and stuff like that. But we went in that, and we parked just next to the other door that folk will be familiar with, and they may well become familiar with it very, very shortly. And that's the entrance that the Prime Minister uses when he or she goes in for the weekly audience, or to shake hands and say, I'm the new guy, or bye-bye and thank you so much. It was thrilling. And the liverymen and the footmen and what have you are so kind and courteous. I mean, they see literally hundreds of people from the great and the good across the spectrum, and yet they kind of sense that for you, this is a big deal, and they do everything within their power to make you feel comfortable, but to make it clear that it's a very special occasion. The only rule of engagement, which I completely understand and fully accept, was that you couldn't take your mobile phone in and take happy snaps, which you can do if you're doing the Duke of Edinburgh's Awards, interestingly, okay, which I've done several times before. But there were beautiful official photographs published as well, which we got copies of, which were lovely. So it was very special. And then there were lots of other guests. Brooke had invited senior representatives from India, from Egypt, from Pakistan, from Kenya, where Her Majesty has been gracious enough to visit the Brooke and see that work on the ground. And they were there, so they were able to meet again with the Queen. Mutual friend Angela Rippon was there, who's another well-known celebrity supporter of the Brooke. and someone I'd not met before, but is one of my pin-ups on television, and that's the Yorkshire Vet from Channel 5's Yorkshire Vet programme, who's recently become a supporter. And as you reminded me when we came into the building, 2 miniature donkeys were there to take part in the proceedings as well.
Yeah, Alfie the donkey and Lala the Shetland pony. Quite interesting names for a Shetland pony and a donkey, or is that pretty common?
I think, no, the names are on you. I mean, Shetlands particularly, we've got Nutkin, who my eldest son calls Nutjob because he just runs around madly the whole time. But our 2 donkeys are called Hobnob and Igglebiggle, for no particular reason, but they're lovely. I mean, donkeys are... I'm biased, of course I am, but Her Majesty knows this as well. Donkeys are incredibly intelligent creatures, and we are lucky enough to have horses and Shetlands as well as big show jumpers. And they tend to do what you ask them to do in their own time, but a donkey is very single-minded. But also, if you are lucky enough to have donkeys, you must have at least 2.
Yes.
Because they're very, very social creatures, and they have their chums. So our 2... like the 2 that the Queen met as well at the palace, they have their buddies as well. So Igglepig and Hobnob sent their kindest regards to Her Majesty.
So they're on best behaviour for Buckingham Palace then, this reception, this donkey
I
and
saw
Shetland
no
pony.
sign, can I say that without being crude, of them not being anything other than on best behaviour. In the courtyard, up the steps and into that lovely great room.
Good to know, good to know. And you, of course, met Her Majesty the Queen.
Yes.
In the bow room of
Yes.
Buckingham Palace. What did she discuss, first of all? What did you discuss with her?
The Brooke, and the fact that we both support it for, I think, essentially 2 reasons. And that is that the Brooke, it's not one of those charities, and she's very good, particularly with her brilliant work with the late Paul O'Grady on dogs and Battersea. But she's an animal lover, generally, which an awful lot of the royal family are, and some of them are professional animal lovers, like the Princess Royal, Zara Tindall, and Louise Windsor, who's a brilliant carriage rider and has inherited her grandfather's great skills as well as some of his kit. I think Her Majesty and I are in that group who support the Brooke because it does good stuff for animals. It encourages dentistry, farrier work, veterinary work to keep that animal as fit as possible. But there's another vital, literally vital reason for that. And that is that in developing countries like Egypt and Pakistan and India over the years, when Dorothy Brooke established it 90 years ago, it was because these folk discarded the animal when it was just old and not terribly well. And what we try and point out, without being condescending but gently, is if you look after these creatures, they are your livelihood, they're your working capital. And a fit donkey with beautifully trimmed feet and a good veterinary practice and good teeth will actually work harder for you and mean that you and your children will do better.
And there's a personal aspect to the Queen here, because her father, Major Bruce Shand, served in Egypt, I believe. And
yes, he was in the Lancers, so he was a horseman anyway, and she's on the record as saying her love of horses really comes from her father as much as anybody. Yes, he served in Egypt, and he saw the work that the Brooke did and mentioned it to her as a child, and then lo and behold, a couple of decades later, she becomes our utterly brilliant and hands-on president.
Alastair, could I ask about that? Like, what is Queen Camilla like as the president of the Brooke?
She's brilliant, and it's easy and lazy to say that, isn't it? But I genuinely mean it. And I put her in the same category as another heroine of mine, and that's the Princess Royal, who is a great supporter of riding for the disabled. And you can get celebrities, and even if you're very lucky, you can get a member of the royal family to support a charity. And they, all of them, do a phenomenal amount of work to support the voluntary sector. And we should all say a huge thank you for that. But what you get with Camilla is the same as you get with the Princess Royal, and that is knowledge. So they don't just say, oh, yes, it's good work that you do, and oh, what a lovely little donkey here. They know why. They know why we're doing it, and she picked that up from her dad. She's picked it up and rubbed it in by actually taking the time and effort to travel abroad to see the work that we do. So she's phenomenally knowledgeable, and one of my greatest moments ever, literally, was when, as Duchess of Cornwall, she persuaded the late Queen to come and visit another charity that we both support, which is called the Ebony Horse Club in Brixton. And again, she was there, she persuaded the Queen, and there were these two amazing women, both just seeing what kids were doing and what kids got out of horses. And Her Majesty said to both Sally and to me when we were at the palace recently, she said, horses and children, it's such a brilliant combination. It's so important for children that they learn to respect and love horses. And I couldn't agree with her more. And donkeys.
Do you think there was a bit of a worry when King Charles ascended the throne that the love the royal family have for horses was going to die with her? But that's not the case, is it?
No, it's not. And yes, the answer to your first part of your question is yes, there absolutely was. And Sally and I are lucky enough to move in circles of the horses, not so much flat racing, which was the late Queen's great passion, a bit more national hunt, which was the Queen Mum's great passion. But our family are essentially show jumpers. That's what we do. And there's not a huge connection with the royal family and show jumping, except the Royal Windsor Horse Show, which is absolutely brilliant. And we went to that a lot of times, and we were even lucky enough to be in the Royal Box a few times.
Wow.
And to watch the late Queen observe what's going on is phenomenal, because it's an expert. It's like Nick Mason of Pink Floyd watching a Grand Prix. They know what they're looking at. They know why they're looking at it. And there's a lovely story. Let me share it with you and our viewers and listeners. The Royal Windsor Horse Show is carriage riding across country. It's also 5-star show jumping. Absolutely brilliant. You get the Household Cavalry do a kind of show as well, and the King Street Royal Horse Artillery. So yeah, it's a brilliant, brilliant show, and everyone should go to it when they can. But it's big on showing as well. And that's people who've got very good ponies or horses that are like crufts with dogs. So you show it, and the judges say, yes, that's the best Shetland, or that's the best whatever it might be. And the story goes, and I didn't witness it, but a friend of mine who was on the committee did witness it. 2 little girls were watching one of the showing rings, and the one little girl said to the other, I think the little grey over there, which is a Highland pony, will win this class, which was kind of all comers. And the other little one said, no, I think that one over there, which is a New Forest pony, the beautiful chestnut coloured one, I think that one will win. And this voice in the background said, I think the grey. And she's mine. And it was Her Majesty the Queen. And she did know exactly what she was talking about.
That's incredible.
Her work for rare breeds, not least Highland ones, is phenomenal.
That must have shocked the 2 little girls, having Her Majesty the Queen behind them.
And do we know if the grey one won?
I don't know, but I imagine so.
Yeah.
I mean, she did have, she had a track record, and go back to Cameron's point about whether or not the passion for equine matters would fade. There's a absolutely brilliant clip of film of both the King and Queen attending Ascot shortly after he had acceded to the throne. It was before the coronation, but it was shortly after. So he was king and she was queen, and there they were in the royal box. And lo and behold, his horse, Desert Hero, won the George V stakes. His grandfather's name commemorated in that. So Desert Hero certainly sealed the deal. So if you own horses, there's nothing quite like winning. And I suspect if you're a member of the royal family, there's nothing quite like winning at Ascot.
And I think it shows them being genuinely normal people, the excitement of winning the horse race, seeing them in the royal box where perhaps they're not on their best behaviour, they're in a relaxed environment. Yes. And you see that coming through.
Oh, and again, there's another fabulous clip of the late Queen literally doing that, which you or I would do if we'd got a fiver on the horse that had just come in. And she used to stand in the royal box with members of her family who shared that passion, whether it was her daughter, the Princess Royal, or her granddaughter, Zara. But it was very often those members of the family who were particularly passionate about horses. I don't think that includes the Prince and Princess of Wales so much, but although they love the event and they love the occasion. But her passion was real, and you're right about that with real people. And I think it comes across in her charity work as well, because through that, although she is Queen, she is Her Majesty, she's not a Royal Highness, she is Her Majesty the Queen, she meets ordinary folk who also support the charities, and they have a love of donkeys or a love of horses in common. And that's beautiful, and it's wonderful, and it means the world to ordinary folk who just do it because they know it's the right thing to do.
Yes, and I've got to ask, when you met Queen Camilla, did you mention GB News to her?
I didn't, although I confess I should have done. But I think she knows of us, and she certainly knows of my involvement in it, because when I was working more regularly for GB News, we did items on the Brooke and on Ebony, and I know for a fact, in the case of the Ebony piece that we did, she and her press secretary, who Cameron knows very well, a delightful man, were very, very helpful in getting us to do that. But I would hope, because they are both brilliant people, that His Majesty and Her Majesty would occasionally watch GB News, because it is the People's Channel and they are very much the People's King and Queen.
Indeed, and we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen and His Majesty the King if they are watching the royal record here on GB News. But Alastair, you mentioned to me earlier that you, of course, were in the lineup to meet the Queen at Buckingham Palace. Your wife wasn't, but Sally did manage to meet the Queen. To tell us that story.
Oh, yes, and Sal's very laid back about that sort of thing. She's not one of those, I must have... So she was just standing quietly. And funnily, I'm name-dropping now, but I'll do it anyway. Rory Bremner is a very good friend of ours. I mean, not least because he has two daughters, both of whom are involved in the horsey world as well. And one of his daughters is a brilliant, brilliant show jumper in the junior GB team. And she was just standing there quietly chatting to Rory. And when I was introduced to Her Majesty, I said, forgive me, may I introduce my wife to you, ma'am, because she and I are going down to the Ebony Horse Club after this wonderful event, which is a charity that we also have in common. And Her Majesty simply smiled and said, yes, of course. And so I just encouraged Sal to come over, and Sal did a brilliant curtsy, and they then engaged in banter, royal banter and Sally Stewart banter about the Ebony Horse Club.
Royal banter in the bow room of Buckingham Palace.
Absolutely. But again, although it was the bow room, and when I've been there in the past, it's quite often been for briefing sessions, I mean, about things like coronations and sadly about royal funerals. That's
yeah.
If the officialdom at the palace has to talk to a lot of us, as you know yourself because you've been there so many times, it's a lovely big room looking out onto the gardens. But also, if you're lucky enough to be asked to take part in the Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme and giving out the gold awards, which, as I said to you earlier, I've done several times, that's also the reception room for that. So, but no, I mean, Sally and Her Majesty were talking about the fact that a friend of ours who runs a wonderful saddlery called Mikado in Hampshire had donated a whole stack of clothes for the kids who don't have a lot of money and don't have a lot going for them, but are keen supporters of the Ebony Horse Club. And Her Majesty said, great, that's absolutely marvellous. I hope they love it. And they will. They're coming down to Hampshire in a couple of weeks' time for a big show.
Do you think the Queen is going to visit the Ebony Horse Club anytime soon?
Can I make a confession to you?
Yes.
I did say to Her Majesty, as I've said to both of you, that a high point of my career was when I commentated on the Ebony Horse Club event, when the then Duchess of Cornwall had persuaded the then Queen Elizabeth II to visit. And I had to do the commentary, which was nerve-wracking because the Queen late Queen knew more than I did about horses than I will ever know, and has forgotten more than I knew. But I did say to Her Majesty Camilla, the Queen, maybe it's about time we could persuade you to pop down and make another visit. But she does so much for so many people: osteoporosis, dogs, domestic violence. I think if I could just throw one thing in, we were talking generally about the royal family and charities. When Camilla adopted domestic violence and spoke so eloquently about it on Radio 4, and when the Princess of Wales adopted a hospice in East Anglia, particularly a children's hospice, it meant the world to that movement. Sally and I are heavily involved in a hospice in Hampshire called Naomi House, And I just know that spirits rose. It's tough work. It's not easy work. But to know that someone like the Princess of Wales, who has fabulous children, is prepared to go in there, roll up her sleeves and talk to mums and dads and siblings and children who are not having such a good time, it means the world. And thank you very much indeed to the whole royal family for all that they do in that vital area.
Because it does mean so much to individual charities if they have a member of the royal family as a patron, because it just gives them so much more publicity and kudos, doesn't it?
It does, and we're blessed with this royal family. I'm not being sycophantic, because I've said it already and I mean it. They know what they're talking about. None of them expose themselves by going into an event where they know there'll be somebody, he or she may be a big donor, or it may be somebody from the press, who will ask them a throwaway question that, if they don't know the answer, will expose ignorance and make somebody who is not as kind-hearted perhaps think, oh, they're just here for the champagne and canopies. Not the case with this royal family. Hardworking, well-informed, knowledgeable, and on top of the brief, as always.
For sure. Alastair, GB News viewers would really love to know, you mentioned at the start why Sally was coming with you to Buckingham Palace for the reception. How are you doing?
I'm all right, touch wood. I was thrilled to bits. Our mutual bosses, Angelo and Mick, have been so supportive and encouraged me to do what I can. I've been up to the studio a couple of times, in addition to doing the interviews that Sally and I both did with Camilla, and she did it brilliantly. I'm a huge fan of Camilla Tominey, both in front of the cameraman, but also behind a typewriter for the Telegraph. She's a brilliant journalist of our age. And then I said I'd really love to come up and give my two penneth on the local elections recently, and they agreed to that, and I came up and I did 4 or 5 stints on that, and so that was good, and it feels really good. It's the best medicine to be still able to come along and hear your questions, and I hope answer them intelligently, and through you communicate with our brilliant family of GB News supporters. And I'm hoping, I know one of the big rumours today is about the timing of the general election, but when it comes, I think it'll be November. I hope very much that Angelo and Mick will have me on board as well then. I've done a few elections in my time.
Absolutely.
But I'm feeling in good shape. How kind of you to ask.
Good, no problem. And we welcome you. We can't wait to have you back at that time as well. Now, Svar's got a bit of a surprise for you, because he was at a briefing with Kensington Palace earlier this week. So, Svar, do you want to tell him?
Yes, so I spoke to Peter Grigg, the CEO of Homestart, and he mentioned that you're a patron for the charity, and he sent you a video message that I can get.
Oh, how brilliant!
Yes,
how brilliant!
Alastair's a real delight. He's done so much over the years, him and his family, for supporting Homestart's work locally and nationally. He's brilliant.
He's a good man, and it's a really important charity. Homestart basically is for families that have got very young children who suddenly hit the rocks and the going gets difficult for them. Bluntly, sometimes we have a lot of clients, as it were, who have a military background. So dad in the past may have had to go to Afghanistan or Iraq or go off somewhere else. And things happen when one partner is away, or maybe the wife has difficulties, or it's just the cost of living crisis, which all GB News viewers know all about. And what Homestarts, through its volunteers, does is to say, don't chuck the towel in. Can we help out? Can we sit and counsel you? Can we do the shopping for you? Can we look after the child for a morning so that you can go and do your own thing? And I'm vice president nationally, but as he said quite rightly there, which was so kind, locally, my wife Sally, who we mentioned in the context of the palace, is joint patron of the Hampshire branch, the Winchester branch. And her joint patron is a brilliant woman called Alison Wakeham, who is the wife of Lord John Wakeham, who is one of the very few people to have served in every one of Margaret Thatcher's cabinets. Really brilliant man, and they are two very dear friends of ours and live near us in Hampshire. But that was so thoughtful, and that that's rather typical. It's a little bit like Queen Camilla. They throw their all at a charity, whether they're chief executive or whether they're president, and yet they still remember other people and they pass on good wishes. And I couldn't say thank you enough. That's so kind. It means the world to me. And thank you for sharing
No
it.
problem. As soon as I spoke to Peter and mentioned I was from GB News, you were the first thing that he brought up, and he just sang your praises. So it was a lovely meeting.
I think it's at a lesser level. If you remember the royal family, it's noblesse oblige is the cliche, but it's, as with all cliches, it's used because it's meaningful. Members of the royal family know that to continue to enjoy their positions and public support, they're expected to give something back, and the voluntary sector, the charity world, is often the easiest way of doing it, and they do it with absolute aplomb. And I think people who are in my line of work, one of the cliches again is faces, people who are well known. And it just explains why people like Angela Rippon and I are absolutely thrilled to bits when somebody picks up the phone and says, look, we know you love horses or donkeys. Would you come on board and support our charity? And I only have two rules. One is it well run? And secondly, is it something that Sally and I can put our hand on our heart and say, yes, we care about that? Homestar children, we've got our own, and touch wood, they're all brilliant, thank you, God. And animals are an important part of our lives as well. So there we are. What a wonderful, wonderful hour or so we've had.
Indeed.
Royal family, donkeys, horses, and people just doing good stuff for other people.
Yeah, we've covered a lot, and we're going to have more from Home Starts UK later on in the podcast because he's been helping out the Princess of Wales with her early childhood work. But Alastair, for now, thank you so much for coming in to speak to us. We really appreciate your time, and it's just lovely sitting and chatting with you.
It's been a pleasure to have you on.
It's genuinely been my pleasure, and it's so important. And good luck with the new brand and the new podcast. I think people who support GB News are likely to lap it up, if I can use that expression. I think an understanding of our royal family, who they are and what they do, is something that GB News viewers and listeners will really consider important. And I'm honoured to have been asked to take part in it.
Fingers crossed. Well, if you've got any messages for Alastair Stewart, then feel free to email us royal@gbnews.uk or use the new hashtag GBNRoyalRecord.
It was wonderful to have Alastair join us today, wasn't it? And he provided such a fantastic insight into what it's like to work with Queen Camilla. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, Alastair's just had this amazing career, and obviously he does so much charity work, particularly with equine and horses, something he clearly really cares about. And I think because he shares that in common with Queen Camilla and indeed the late Queen Elizabeth II, they have a lot to talk about, and he has a lot of this kind of royal horsey knowledge. And I mean, what I loved was him talking through the process of, getting to the gate, like getting his car checked by the police, like at the gate of Buckingham Palace, going through into the quadrangle, meeting the horses, and then, of course, the Queen. And I think it's just really nice hearing from someone who's actually gone in for a reception, because there's one thing me going in for, a briefing or something where we're taking in the staff entrance and there's loads of scaffolding and corridors, kind of underneath, but going into the grand bit of the palace, completely different. Yeah.
And something that really struck me was Alastair's thoughts on how strong of a royal family we have in terms of a skill set and how knowledgeable they are. And they really are the real deal in terms of being able to talk about an array of subjects at any given moment.
Yeah.
And I think with Camilla, he was so passionate about the great work that she's doing. And it actually coincides with our GB News membership poll this week.
Yeah, here we go.
So we asked our members this month, as it marks 1 year since King Charles and Queen Camilla were crowned during the coronation, do you think Camilla has done a good job during her first year as Queen? So we had 410 members.
Drum roll.
410 members took part in the poll, with a massive 82% saying yes, they think Camilla has done a good job. 16% voted no, and 2% said they did not know. So that's a overwhelming majority thinking she has done a good job. What's your reaction to that?
Well, any politician would die for those ratings, is my first point. But I think it just shows, what a contrast from, I hate to bring it back to 30 years ago, but it is so true. Can you imagine Queen Camilla polling that, in the 1990s? But there's a reason for that, I think. And it's because she really held up the monarchy, I think, at the start of this year, because we had the king out of action because of his enlarged prostate and cancer diagnosis, the Princess of Wales out of action because of her abdominal surgery and cancer diagnosis, and Prince William was supporting his wife and his 3 young children. So out of the top 4 royals, it was only Camilla keeping the show on the road. So she carried out a lot of engagements. I think also the charity areas which she's chosen to focus on in her career as a working member of the royal family, as Alastair was saying earlier, domestic violence, literacy as well, I think really resonated with people. And I remember reporting on this at the time, and something which GB News viewers and listeners really cared about was, do you remember when the publisher of the Roald Dahl books were planning to do new versions of the books to make them less offensive and not use the word fat when talking about Augustus Gloop in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or something like that? And the Queen didn't directly address it, but in February 2023, she delivered a speech in Clarence House at a reception full of authors, and she said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, don't allow people to curb your freedom of expression. And a lot of people read that as her indirectly intervening in that particular decision by the publisher. And the publisher changed their mind and continued to publish the original books as well as the new versions, should people be offended by that. And I think a lot of the normal British public really were happy that Camilla did that. Yeah,
I think that's a great example of maybe Camilla's growing influence, and an endorsement from Camilla does mean so much now. We've seen her step up this year, both with when Charles, pre the cancer announcement, when they were going on their international royal tours, there was a fantastic moment with Camilla and Brigitte Macron during the France tour, and she also accompanied Charles in Germany as well. And then the kind of following 6 months after Charles was diagnosed with cancer, she's had a very different role, but a role of leadership and something that she's really stepped up to the plate with. We saw her lead the royal family at the Thanksgiving service in February. That was also in the absence of Prince William. And we're seeing a new side to Camilla since she has become Queen.
Yeah, and I think she carries her own, because there was a few engagements I know that the Queen did solo, but the original plan was for the King to be with her. So she can, command a crowd, and people love to see her. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how all of her work and polling continues in the future. But we were talking about Alastair Stewart, of course, being on the show, and we surprised him, or you surprised him, with Peter Grigg from Homestart UK, the charity you interviewed at the briefing for Kensington Palace, because the Princess of Wales, although, and I should say, she's absolutely not back at work and still continuing her cancer recovery, but she has seen and is very excited by a new report from, this is a bit of a mouthful, so forgive me, but the Princess of Wales's Royal Foundation Centre for Early Childhood Business Task Force. I'm so glad I nailed that. That
was a mouthful.
Thank you.
Yeah, you did absolutely nail it. Yes, they published a report this week setting out the business case for prioritising early childhood, and they've crunched the numbers, and they estimate that investing in early childhood could generate at least 45.5 billion in additional revenue for the UK economy each year.
Yeah.
What did you make of the report?
I mean, it was a huge number. I think the report itself, there's not many people, the Princess, who can galvanise big bosses of top UK companies to come together into a room and come up with ideas to put into this report, which we were told by one source that it should be seen as a bit of a blueprint as to how businesses, big or small, whether it's like a coffee shop in Wolverhampton or a big chain like IKEA, can make small adjustments to help out the working parents who work for the company, and B, just the investment in young children, how that in the future can benefit society and make businesses more productive, because people are taking less sick days or less mental health days and things like that. So we got a bit of a crunch down of the numbers. We'll try and not make this too boring for you, but Emma Franklin, who's director of consulting at Deloitte, which produced the task force report, said investing in social and emotional skills for the under fives, known as so-called like soft skills, associated with resilience, problem solving, empathy, the productivity gain of that could be £12.2 billion each year. Then there's also encouraging parents and caregivers, giving them or helping them with more suitable childcare for under fives, could come to 17.2 billion a year. and then also mitigate what they'd say is mitigating the adverse childhood experiences. In other words, if a child has a poor start in life, is neglected between the years 0 to 5, they're more likely to have mental health problems, addiction. That's why the princess started all of this in the first place with early childhood and investing in early childhood. And the reduction of the money spent on dealing with crisis like mental health, addiction, crime could come to 16.1 billion. So all of that rounds up to, what was it,
45.5 billion.
45.5 billion. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, and on the scale of that, something that you said, and the example that was given during the briefing really stuck with me, where they said, we want this to be implemented across businesses in the UK, whether that's a small coffee shop in Wolverhampton or, a titan of an industry. And being born and raised in Wolverhampton, I can almost picture my local coffee shop. And then when they said that at the briefing, we were sat in Deloitte's headquarters in London, Deloitte being a multi-international company. And so from thinking about exactly what a local coffee shop in Wolverhampton looks like to this multi-international business, the scale of what they want to implement, you can see why it would be worth 45.5 billion, but it will be a huge challenge to be able to get businesses of all shapes and sizes to be able to buy into this.
Yeah, it's incredibly ambitious, and I can't imagine a small struggling coffee shop in Wolverhampton, for example, is going to be able to help their employees with childcare, which is clearly incredibly expensive. We also know that clearly the princess cannot be political. She's obviously been briefed on the report and can convene people together. But we do know that the Early Childhood and the Royal Foundation have briefed the government on the report. So Downing Street's been informed, the Department for Education, Department for Health. We're told that conversations were not political, but I think it would be interesting at some point to hear their views on this and also see if they implement strategies from other companies. And the Princess of Wales went on a fact-finding mission to Denmark to see how they support early childhood and how that really impacts their society, and whether the government here is going to implement that. So although the princess isn't directly getting involved in politics, it does have implications for wider society.
Yeah, and we know how strongly Kate feels this is a priority. She said, we were briefed that that these soft skills they feel can make a massive difference across the industry and business, and that Kate's genuinely excited about this and is looking forward to seeing the monumental growth over the next few months. So it's definitely a huge challenge for them to be able to implement, but they seem to feel, this task force, that if they get it right, the benefits will have a ripple effect throughout the UK.
Yeah, and this is not going to be an overnight change. I think this is clearly going to be a generational thing. We're told that this is going to be the Princess of Wales's life's work. So, next 2-3 decades, probably, we're going to start to see the proper results of this. But of course, the princess wasn't there. She hasn't been doing any engagements recently because she is still recovering from her cancer treatments and her preventative chemotherapy. And it's understood that she will return to work when doctors give her the green light. So this, although it's a slight update from the Princess of Wales, it's very much focused on the Early Childhood Business Task Force and should not be seen as the princess returning to work anytime soon. But of course, we wish her all the best.
Yep, and it was stressed very heavily that Kate is not returning to work and that she has monitored the report but hasn't had any input into it. We did see Prince William throw a garden party at Buckingham Palace this week, and he invited Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, and Zara Tindall, among a lot of a younger generation of royals that we haven't normally seen at these things.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Phillips and Mike Tindall were there as well. It was completely unexpected when I was told that this was going to be happening. I thought Prince William might be hosting a garden party because he hasn't done one this year. And poor William, it was absolutely torrential rain in London yesterday, as we all kind of discovered. Kate Mansi of The Times titled it "Long to Rain Over Us." Great little pun there, which I really enjoyed. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting that Prince William had invited this younger generation of the royal family alongside the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, who were there as working royals as well. But I think despite the rain, I think the public who had been invited were really happy to see that younger generation of royals. It's something which has been quite rare recently because the likes of Princess Beatrice, Eugenie, Zara are not on the balcony anymore of Buckingham Palace, whereas in times gone by they would have been, but before 2018. And we've talked a lot about this slimmed down monarchy. So I asked the question to somebody close to William, well, is this a situation where Prince William could call upon this younger generation of royals to carry out more public duties in the future, because we've got a very aging working population of royals at the moment, with the Duke of Kent, Princess Alexandra in their 80s approaching 90. The Duke of Gloucester turns 80 this year. So are we going to see that? And I was kind of categorically told absolutely not. This is just Prince William inviting them to the garden party, and it's something that the late Queen, as in Elizabeth II, did on a number of occasions. And that is true. We did see the likes of Zara, Princess Beatrice, Eugenie at garden parties in the past. It's just not happened for a few years.
Yeah, and it was seen as it's not going to be an indication that they will become working royals. But something that I did take away from it is that Eugenie and Beatrice in particular, we know how close they are to Prince Harry. Earlier this month, they both chose not to attend Prince Harry's Invictus event at St. Paul's Cathedral. And it felt like a real statement for me that Beatrice and Eugenie had chosen to go to Prince William's garden party so soon after snubbing Harry's event. Is this now the younger generation of the royal family coming together publicly and putting on a united front? The contrasting appearance of all the younger generation flocking to this Buckingham Palace garden party whilst Prince Harry was left alone at St. Paul's Cathedral with no working members of the royal family, and he was only joined by Diana's side of the family. Was just something that really struck me.
Yeah, it is a really interesting point, actually. And I thought, but ahead of the Invictus service at St. Paul's with Prince Harry, I thought if any members of the royal family are going to turn up, it is going to be Princess Eugenie or Beatrice, particularly Eugenie, because we know they are, we think, still quite close. I mean, there's, a picture of her husband Jack Brooksbank and Harry and Meghan at a costume party in North America before it was announced that Harry and Meghan were in a relationship. But that didn't happen. As you say, it was Charles Spencer and Prince Harry's aunt as well, to Prince Diana's siblings there with him. And the image of Prince William with his cousins Zara, Eugenie, Beatrice, and their spouses, I think did speak volumes. And also it was nice in the absence of the Princess of Wales, who clearly, if she wasn't going through cancer treatment, would have been at that garden party. It was nice to see that younger generation supporting the future king, because at some point Prince William is going to take the top job, and it's going to be that generation of royals who are going to have to support them. And of course we've got Prince George, Charlotte and Louis, but they're still very, very young. It's going to be at least a decade before they undertake any form of public royal duties. So I thought it was a really lovely thing to see, actually, that united front.
Yeah, and going on that, we know that this isn't going to suddenly open a doorway for Eugenie and Beatrice to take up royal engagements or to become working royals. We did do a GB News membership poll last month asking our readers, should Beatrice and Eugenie be included in the royal family's inner circle? And I'd love to get your thoughts on the result.
Go for it.
So our members were split on this. We had 35% voting yes, but 61% said no, with 4% saying they were unsure. So the overall majority is that our readers do not want them to become working royals. Why do you think that is?
I think the problem with Eugenie and Beatrice, I say problem, it's obviously not their fault, is that they still have their father, Prince Andrew, being such a taboo at the moment. His polling is beyond horrific. It's worse than Harry and Meghan's. Clearly, we had the disaster of a Newsnight interview and all the allegations surrounding him, which he denies them all. But I think perhaps that might be part of it. But also, Beatrice and Eugenie, I suspect they don't want to be full-time working members of the royal family. They have full-time jobs. They'll step in if necessary, but they're also young mothers. They have their own families. I think they like not having to be in the spotlight all the time, the constraints that comes with being a full-time working member of the royal family in terms of the security arrangements, the constant scrutiny. So I'm getting the sense that perhaps they don't want to. Princess Eugenie's got her own Instagram account, for example. She wouldn't be able to do that as a working member of the royal family. Her staff would have to do it.
Yeah.
So it's those little things, I think, as to why we don't need that. I think Prince William and his cousins, are close enough with Beatrice and Eugenie to realise that even if they are close with Harry and Meghan, it doesn't really matter. Okay, William might have beef with his brother. There's not much they can do about that. But also, I think they're all mature enough, hopefully, to realise that you can be friends with everybody in your family if you so wish. And I think this idea of stuff being leaked to Harry and Meghan and worried that it's going to go up on Netflix, it's just, you're never going to know for a fact if that's like happening or not. And I think when it comes to Beatrice and Eugenie, I think if there wasn't any trust of them with members of the royal family, we wouldn't have seen them at that garden party. And I think royal family, everything about them is about images and the way things are perceived by those images. And seeing Prince William, the future king, the next king, with Beatrice and Eugenie shows to me that they're very trusted and very loved members of the royal family. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. You can keep up to date on our Twitter at GB News. Of course, email us in your thoughts, royal@gbnews.uk. Use the hashtag GBN Royal Record as well.
And you can stay up to date with all the latest royal news and analysis at gbnews.com/royal or by signing up to our royal newsletter.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends, give us a 5-star rating if you would like to. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, we're also on YouTube as well. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.